What's going on, gang, and welcome back to Scared of Normal. I'm Mike Burfitt, joined today by my co-host Chase Willie, and on this episode, we're stoked to be sitting down with the founder and builder of the Bender Bicycle Company, Will Bender. Dude, thank you so much for coming to chat and tell some stories and talk about what you've got going on, dude.
Sweet. Well, I really appreciate you having me, and yeah, stoked to chat.
Hell yeah, dude. Well, I'm blown away by the work that you're doing as an up-and-coming frame builder. And I wouldn't even say you're up-and-coming because you're fairly well established at this point. And if you ran into somebody on the street, a complete stranger, how would you describe who you are and what you do?
I get asked that all the time, like, oh, what do you do? And I'm like, I build bikes. And people always, it's like, oh, you put bikes together, you put parts on it. And so explaining to people that, no, I actually cut metal, bend metal, and weld it together. And that's what I do. So that's kind of the bare bones, but it's more than that. It's, when you're in the bike scene, you often want something that fits you or something that's unique, and custom bikes is that kind of option. So people come to me and say, hey, I'm looking for this. It might not exist on the market, or it might be something that doesn't fit them. So like a lot of people, they're actually not going to fit on a normal bike. So, they come to someone like me because I can custom make everything and build something that they fit perfectly to. So yeah, I mostly focus on steel bikes right now. I'll probably do some tie here soon. But yeah, I build custom mountain bikes, gravel bikes, built a couple road bikes. So I'll kind of build anything. At the end of the day, most bikes are pretty similar.
Yeah.
But for me, like, I'm a mountain biker through and through. So what I love to build is mountain bikes. So that's what I do, build custom bikes.
Right on, man.
That's crazy. It's so it's so technical trying to think of how to even put a bike together or spec it out. So I'm really excited to talk to you and kind of get your take on those details, but also just kind of the high level picture of who you are as a person and kind of what got you into this industry.
Totally.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I love that you touch on how like technical it is, because the first time I ever watched somebody like cut and bend and like stitch stuff together, I was just like, this is the most insane thing in the world. Because when you don't see it, like when you don't see how the sausage is made, you're just riding a bike, but you sit there and watch somebody that's their craft, and you're just like, oh my gosh, like this is why hand-built bikes are so sick.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's cool. It's funny to be in it more, and like I have to remind myself that it is very technical, because once you get a little bit farther down the road, you realize, oh, there's actually a lot, there's a lot of free-flowing things where you don't have to be as technical. At the end of the day, it is like something that, you want to ride and don't die on, but you have so much freedom within the constraints of a bicycle. So it is very technical, but at the same time, you have a ton of creative freedom, which is mostly why I love it.
I love that.
I got a lot of respect for it, because I'm scared to even thread a bottom bracket into my new steel bike, and so it's really cool. I'm excited to talk to you.
Cool. I love that you said, as you're looking at a bike, you're like putting it together and you're like, this is something you could die on. Because that was something I remember from the first time watching somebody like miter tubing. I was like, oh my gosh, that tubing is like really thin, and I'm going to have to like ride that, not realizing that like all bike tubing is that thin. But yeah, until you're like get that visceral hands-on experience, you're just like, oh, it's a bike. It's pretty safe.
Yeah, for sure. And then that's another benefit of steel. Steel is such a malleable material that it's not going to, it can catastrophically fail, but at the end of the day too, there's, steel can bend and move a ton, which allows you to be able to fix and repair it. And also, in a situation where you might get, a ding or bend something, like it's not going to just explode on you.
Totally. That's why steel is real, man.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely.
Big steel fan over here.
Yeah.
Well, sick, dude. Let's throw it back and learn a little bit more about you. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Leadville. Up in the mountains.
No way.
Yeah. Yep, born and raised.
How was it growing up there? Because that is a crazy place that I love, and I have a ton of friends up there, but I can't imagine it's a crazy place to grow up.
Yeah, I always tell people it took me like leaving to realize like how cool it was to grow up there. For me, it was like that's all I knew, and all I wanted to do was get out of there. And then, I came to college at CSU, and you meet people and they all grew up in suburbia in Denver, and, their minds are blown that you grew up in a mountain town. And so I'm like, okay, I have more reverence for what that was and what that experience was. So yeah, grew up in Leadville was amazing. My dad was a college professor at CMC, and he taught in the ski industry. So we were big outdoor people. my parents moved there for that reason, so skied since I was 2 years old, would probably ski 100 days a year every year as a kid. So that was like my life forever. So Leadville was amazing. Looking back, it was like I could leave from my house and hike up the hill and we could ski, or, we'd ride bike. I mean, I didn't ride bikes actually that much as a kid, just a little bit. It was mostly skateboarding was like my jam, and then skiing. So yeah, it was amazing. It's a small town, which has its perks and its downsides, but at the end of the day, it's like I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Have you been back there recently?
We go back in the summer quite a bit.
Cool.
Like we go up for the 100 every year. We usually have a few friends doing it. My parents moved up to kind of our neck of the woods by Fort Collins a few years ago. So now we don't have like family up there. So we don't go up as much, but yeah, we go up. I love it up there still. And so we try to get up there as much as we can.
How has it seen, or how has it been kind of watching that town grow over the years and kind of evolve from what it was when you were a kid to what it is now?
Yeah, I think it's good. I think overall for the community, it's great. We finally have an influx of money a little bit. So the economy is changing. And I think it's kind of the last town up in the mountains to really kind of pop off. And, I mean, you even see the real estate value going up quite a bit. But it's cool at the same time. You see lots of new and stuff coming in. There's cool coffee shops and different things like that growing up that just didn't exist. It was a pretty, pretty rough town and pretty like old school mountain town, but it was, it's cool to see it change. I think there's part of me that's nostalgic to like the way it was.
Sure.
And I'm kind of like, get out of here, but at the same time, I'm really excited and there's just more opportunity there, which is great.
Yeah. That town has a lot of grit, man. Yeah. Like it's pretty crazy. What's the elevation there?
It's over 10,280.
That's so crazy.
Yeah, it is great.
Yeah. I feel like a big contributor to that grit, man. You got to be tough to live there. And especially I'm sure like, as a kid, like having to walk to school or like even just driving around up there in the winter. That's pretty gnarly, man.
Yeah. I don't think we had a single snow day as a kid. It was like,
oh man,
wow.
I mean, part of it was they were just really good at moving snow, but at the same time, it's like, well, you're tough. Just, go to school.
Heck yeah.
Yeah.
Did you graduate high school up there?
Yeah.
What was your graduating class size?
I think we had like 30 something. Pretty small.
Smokes.
I think it was like maybe 300 kids in our whole school.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's super cool.
That's similar. So I grew up here in Longmont. I think that Mike and I feel kind of the same way, where this place has grown so much over the last few years. And on one hand, it's really cool to see. On the other hand, it's like, oh, that used to be a field that I would like play on my bikes in as a kid. But then I went to middle school and high school in Lyons, and we had a really similar class size, just a small mountain town. And how was that experience for you, kind of being in that small classroom size? And were there some pros and some cons that you were able to kind of pull out of that?
Yeah, I think most of it was like a pro. It felt, you felt connected to everyone. Everyone knew you, and there wasn't this clickiness or this kind of you're on the inside and you're on the outside. So I got to avoid all of that, which feels like, honestly, in today's world, like a pretty big downside to, a childhood.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'd say most of it's good. And, it's like I had a lot of really close friends because of that. Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it too. And it's like, I also don't know any different, but when I talk to people, it's like, oh, I had 500 kids in my class. I'm like, that is insane to me.
Yeah. Bigger than your entire school.
Yeah,
that's
totally
bizarre.
So yeah, I loved it. And it felt very like intimate, and, it felt a little bit like the stakes were a little bit lower too. It just felt easier.
Sure.
Yeah. But it was weird to like see, you'd go out to eat some night and you see your teachers like drunk at the bar or something.
That's amazing. Funny. Yeah, that's the small town stuff that's like funny when you like grow up and realize that you like see your teacher out drinking. You're like, oh, weird.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you have any favorite subjects growing up in school?
I mean, I've always been like a creative person, so I kind of gravitated towards that kind of thing, art or computer. So at the time, like graphic design, I didn't even know what that meant, but messing around in Paint or PowerPoint and making something look cool, like that's the kind of stuff I gravitated towards. Or even like wood shop or things where I got to make stuff. That was always, which I mean, kind of segues into what I've ended up doing. But
totally,
yeah, I've always been into that kind of more creative, side of things.
Wood shop, man, the long lost school.
Yeah,
man,
like class.
I didn't have wood shop.
I loved that in school.
Yeah. I mean, we had wood shop. We had like an automotive class. I mean, it's like when you kind of are in a smaller town, there's a little bit more
automotive.
Like, yeah. I didn't actually do that, but it was like you learned how to do the basics of a car and
Cool.
oil change. And
That's rad.
yeah. But wood shop was always awesome, building like random stuff, you know,
Little
cutting boards.
birdhouses and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's cool. Yeah.
Heck yeah. So you said that you didn't really find bikes until, you know, a little after. When did that happen for you?
Yeah, so I came to college at CSU, and then that's kind of where bikes started for me a little bit. Like, I mean, I rode a BMX bike a little bit as a kid, as everyone does, you know. But yeah, I came to college, and that's when the whole fixed gear culture was super popular.
Interesting.
And so, you know, I'd go to Fort Collins, and everyone was riding, you know, fixed gear around or whatever. So I realized, I was like, oh, I should maybe get into this. It seems like I've always kind of been into, you know, a little bit of more subcultures, like kind of what's punk rock or whatever. And at the time, that's what that was. And so, yeah, I was like, oh, I'll buy some old road bikes and figure out how to turn them into a fixed gear. So that's kind of what I started doing. And like I would go to the dump in Leadville and like find these old, you know, 80s road bikes,
Dang.
tear them apart,
Cool.
turn them into, you know, fixed gears and sell them. Like that's how I made some money for a while,
Oh,
which is
that's
pretty fun.
sick.
Wow.
And that's kind of what got me into bikes. And then, you know, I've always also been like a little bit of an adrenaline junkie, you know, being in skiing and skateboarding. So I'm like, well, the fixed gear doesn't really do it for me, you know? And so that's when I started learning more about mountain bikes, and yeah, then bought a hardtail, and just then I've like fell in love, you know?
Heck yeah. Do you remember your first trail that you rode? Was it in Port Collins?
Yeah, probably. I mean, there's Maxwell, which is like on the front side, like where the A is up by Horseshoes.
Mhm.
That was probably the first like trail up there that I rode. I rode mountain bikes like a few times. I had a buddy growing up who was into it a bit. And so I remember in high school, I had to borrow his dad's bike and ride a little bit, but it was like an old 90s Gary Fisher or something, you
Right
know,
on, yeah.
super long stem and not very fun.
Yeah, totally.
totally.
You're like, why do people like doing this? This is
Totally.
weird.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's where bikes kind of started for me, is mostly through the fixed gear thing. And then, yeah, and then bought a hardtail and kind of got really into it. And then I moved so I went to college, and then I moved to San Francisco for a while. I studied architecture. And so then I got a job at a firm in San Francisco, lived out there and like rode my fixed gear, you know, through the city all the time, which was super fun. And that's when I started learning about the handmade bike scene and started following the Radavist, really. And it wasn't even the Radavist at the time. It was like pre-Radavist.
What was
And
it before that?
It was
Do you
called Probably Is Not Probably, which
Okay.
is like, it was this kind of weird underground blog that John just ran. And so I started following that like in college.
remember? Whoa.
And then it turned into the Radavist of what it is today. But it was way different because he was really big into the fixed gear messenger scene. He was living in New York at the time or something. And so anyways, that's where I kind of started following that and understanding like, oh, people build bikes. Like that's kind of crazy.
Wow.
And so I started being a lurker more than anything and just started understanding, and especially in San Francisco, in Northern California, there's a huge scene for handmade bikes. And so being around that a little bit and not really a part of it, but just more observing.
Heck yeah. Were
Yeah.
you like visiting any of the shops out there that were building, or
I
just
hadn't even got that far yet, really. I was just like behind a computer screen, like trying to like look and see what's going on, you know?
heck yeah.
At the time, I was way more of like an introvert kid and just like didn't want to put myself out there at the time, you know?
Yeah.
I wish I would have, because it was like, that's the spot to do it. There's all these kind of old head guys that just, you know, have a wealth of knowledge, but I was too scared.
Heck yeah. Yeah. That's how it goes, man. How old were you when you
I
were
mean,
out
I
there?
was, you know, 22, 23 or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's when you're kind of still figuring out who you are and what you want to do, it's hard to like branch out and show up to somebody's shop and be like, hey man, what's going on here?
Totally,
So I
Yeah.
get that entirely.
Yeah, for sure.
So when did you leave that job? Like obviously you're not doing architecture anymore. So
Yeah, so I was only out there for like a year. My wife and I, we were dating at the time, long distance, and my job just wasn't great. I didn't love it, and I was also just like kind of ready to be back in Colorado more than anything. And so, yeah, I spent a year there and then moved back here in, I guess it would have been 2012, something like that, or no, 2013, something around there.
okay.
Yeah, so I spent some time out there, but yeah, it ended up just not really working out more than anything. I worked at a small architecture firm, and I was one of 2 Americans in an entire company, and everyone else was from Taiwan, and then all of our work was in China.
Whoa.
And it's like, you know, I think that culture they just have a different work ethic, and I definitely respect it. You know, they just put in a ton of hours. And so, you know, being my first like big time job, and I'm putting in like, you know, 60+ hour weeks or
Oof.
not. And I was just like, man, I can't do this.
That's
No.
hectic, man.
Yeah, it was cool. It was like a really great experience, and I don't regret it at all. But I was like, man, I don't know if I want to do this for a while, you know? So yeah, I ended up, it was kind of a multi-circumstance thing where I just decided, hey, Colorado is kind of where I need to be. And so came back.
Right on. So what did you do after you left the architecture?
Yeah, so I left
job?
architecture and I came back and got a job at actually an engineering firm well, I started out in the model shop, like actually building like physical architectural models. We basically were testing buildings in a wind tunnel is kind of what we did. So any new construction that was happening, we would build a model, put it in a wind tunnel and test it for structural loads and whatnot. It was pretty crazy. So I got a job like just physically building models. And then I also had a ton of AutoCAD experience. And so they're like, oh, do you want to start 3D modeling and doing all that? So I did that for like 5 years.
Wow.
Which was great. I mean, it's so weird. Like bikes are so far from a lot of what I've done in the past, but there's so many skill sets that have just transferred over.
Mm-hmm.
And, collectively it's made the bike stuff so much easier for me. But yeah, 3D modeling was like what I did for multiple years, just like making buildings and then 3D printing them,
That's crazy. Yeah. And it's cool to see how much of that technology is now like just catching up to the bike world where people are starting to utilize it. You're utilizing it, right?
Yeah. And I saw a couple people when I first did it, like when I first started building bikes, I knew like right away, I had seen a few people doing it and I'm like, I need to do this because I already have the skill set to be able to model it. So I might as well to make my life so much easier. And so I'm glad I was just kind of ahead of that learning curve a bit for that. But yeah, it was cool. I mean, I look back at it and it was like a very corporate job, like sitting in a cubicle all day. And that's what I hated about it.
Mm-hmm.
But, learned some cool stuff. And there actually was a couple rad people in there too. So it was great,
Right on.
Yeah.
So where do you go from there?
So then from there is when I started working at Pine Print Shop. Garrett really well.
Oh yeah. Shout out to Garrett.
For sure. So yeah, good buddy of mine. And at the time I was really burnt out of sitting at a desk all day. And, he's like, hey, I'm kind of growing this business. I think at the time it was him and, a couple high school kids helping out. And he's like, hey, do you want to just come and help me and do whatever it takes to kind of continue to grow this thing? So I just jumped on board, left that job and joined him. And yeah, helped him for 3 or 4 years, something like that. And just, from the day I started, we were in like a 700 square foot.
I was going to ask
garage.
if you guys were still in like the original or
tiny little shop. And then by the time I left, we had, 8 employees or something and a bigger shop. So it's like it went through a ton of transition, which was really fun. And again, another skill set that really transferred is like, Garrett was a small business owner and very transparent about what he was doing and how he was running his business. And I learned so much about how that all works. I didn't come from anyone being an entrepreneur or having family or friends that did that. So that was like a pretty pivotal experience to kind of see behind the curtain a little bit in a small business and definitely gave me more confidence to kind of do my own thing.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Were you being like intentionally trying to pull cues from what he was doing? Like, did you have something in the back of your mind that was like, one day I want to start my own business and maybe in the bike industry? Or was that kind of just eventually you were like, oh, these last few years have been really good experience and I can pull from that?
I think a bit of both. Like, I think the bike thing had always been there and something I knew that I was going to learn to do at some point. Whether or not it was going to be a business, I wasn't maybe quite sure on when I started working with Garrett. But like over the years working there, I just got more and more into it and interested in the whole scene and kind of the craft. And so it slowly became apparent that I was like, oh, this is going to be a great experience for me to be able to kind of pull from this to do my own thing. So
cool.
Yeah, it started out probably not that way and then kind of transitioned to more like, okay, let me actually look a little bit deeper so I can kind of cultivate some knowledge here.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Cool.
And what a beautiful experience too, to be like fully immersed in, going from being in like a little tiny garage to like where it was when you ended up, venturing out on your own. Like that's unique. Not a lot of people get to experience a business grow like that.
Yeah, it was pretty wild, honestly. And I think like looking back, I think is easier now. It's like, obviously we had tons of growing pains and there's so much to that story, but ultimately it's like, yeah, it was really amazing to kind of see that and honestly, just to be a part of it too. It felt very satisfying and just to be, I think Garrett really trusted me as a partner too, which was really awesome. And to have that experience with him was really fun, and to be really transparent with each other and really lean on each other was really fun. And it's cool to be able to be a part of growing something like that, and also just to be able to see something like that happen, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And you were doing a lot of graphic design stuff there as well, right?
Yeah, honestly, I kind of wore every hat, you know, at some point, from printing the shirt to mixing the ink to designing it, you know, all the way to implementing as many processes as we could to make things more efficient, to then at the end towards like managing everything. So yeah, I kind of wore every hat, but graphic design had always been something I'd done a little bit on the side, and that definitely kind of grew there and had more opportunity to continue to grow that skill there for sure.
Heck yeah, man. Yeah, I think that was the first time I came into Pine and you were there. I think you were sitting there working, like doing a workup on the computer, and I was like, this place is insane, man. Like, it was mind blowing, and it was the first time we ever had shirts printed there, and you guys were so kind, and yeah, it was just mind blowing seeing all of that unfold. So at what point did it start like formulating in your head that you're going to kind of venture out? What did that process look like?
Yeah, so it actually was 2020. So right before COVID, I decided, I was like, hey, I need to give this bike thing a shot. So what I did is I signed up for a class. So there's this class out in Oregon that was a frame building class, 2 weeks. You go and you basically build a bike, and well, the instructor builds one and you kind of follow along and build yourself a bike.
Cool.
So one of my buddies had been interested in it too. And I was like, hey, do you want to go do this? And so we flew out there and spent 2 weeks, and yeah, I built my first bike.
Wow.
It was really amazing. And from more than anything, it was like, hey, am I going to love this as much as I think I will?
Sure.
And I mean, a couple hours in, I'm like, I'm all in, you know.
That's
like,
so
this
cool.
I was like, this is amazing. So yeah, it was like 2 weeks, and I mean, I bought a welder before that, knowing I was going to that class. And so I like literally in my basement had set this welder up and was like, you know, welding practice joints or whatever, which was cool.
I was going to ask, like, did you have any welding experience before that?
Welding, no. I had like a little bit of like fabrication stuff, just because I've always been like kind of more towards my backstory a little bit, but like I've always made stuff. And a lot of that is from my dad. My dad was always the guy that was like, I'm going to fix it or I'm going to make it, and rather than buy it, which is great. So it was always like, we're working on the car, or we're going to build a bench or a table. When we're not going to buy it, we're going to either fix it or build it. So I've always had that like kind of mentality in my head. And so some of that knowledge, and just like, yeah, a little bit of the creative side too. And then through my other jobs, just knowing like, okay, I know how things get put together. I can kind of think through that a little bit. But as far as like welding, I had no experience.
I think in a lot of cases, curiosity is a lot more valuable than experience too. Cause you know, you have the curiosity to kind of learn that tool half on your own, and then half with instruction out in Oregon. And then it kind of grows and develops into a bigger thing. So that's really cool.
Yeah. And I would totally agree. It's like, for me, I've always been the type of guy I'm going to just try it. You know, I think there's a lot of people, it's like, well, I want to learn, or I want to take a class first, or all this kind of stuff. And I've just found it super valuable just like to dive in and just see what happens, you know, as long as it's not something that can kill you, you know.
Sure,
it's like, you might as well give it a go and just see what happens and allow yourself to fail. You know, I think you're only going to continue to grow and learn if you just give yourself a chance, you know. And I think I think because I'd been a lurker in the industry or with the kind of bike thing for so long, it was like, I got to like shit or get off the pot, you know, I got to just like try it, you know. And so it was kind of one of those moments where it's like, my curiosity had been like kind of in the back for so long that I'm like, got to just try it and see what happens.
Did that curiosity start with just making a custom bike for yourself, and you were kind of going to build that up and see where that took you and how it rode? Or?
Pretty much, yeah. Like at the engineering job that I had, like I was in AutoCAD all day, and honestly, like that job, I could have worked half as much. You know, I could have worked for 20 hours a week and done what I do, you know. So I had so much time to kind of just dick around on the other screen, if you will. And so I was like, I was getting into it, and I was like designing all these like fixtures, and I didn't know anything what I was doing. I've never touched any bike equipment, but in my head I knew everything, you know. So I was like designing bikes and AutoCAD and all this stuff, but it's like at the end of the day, you have no idea what that's going to be like until you actually do it, you know. So that's where it started. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to go do this. So I signed up for this class, flew out there, and that's when the rubber hit the road, and I was like, man, it's totally different than what I thought it'd be. And I still am like all in. So it was 2 weeks, and you basically kind of design the bike however you want. I decided just to build a hardtail because that's what I wanted. And you just kind of learn step by step. The instructor would kind of go the step before you, and then you'd spend a couple hours like working on that piece, and then kind of just continue on.
That sounds like a lot of fun, actually. And I love the fact that you like touched on like most things in your life you've kind of just like jumped headfirst into and become fully immersed, because I think that's a thing that a lot of people are scared to do.
Totally.
And like the only way you actually get good at something is by jumping in headfirst, not knowing anything and failing like nonstop. And then you come out the other end, you're like, oh, cool. Now I know how to do this.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, yeah, I mean, I've definitely been on both sides of that where it's like, oh, I'm not sure about this, but I think I do regret not doing it earlier, you know? And so I think that's continued to form my decisions on, you know, moving forward, where it's like, well, that worked out. If I just jumped in before, I might as well try now and not delay the inevitable. Let's just get into it, you know? So I think it's been a good test to that skill set and being able to be willing just to say yes and see what happens. I also I have a very addictive personality too. And anything I'm into, I'll spend hours and hours and hours learning anything I could possibly learn about it, you know, just to know, you know? And so it was one of those things where like, I've spent way too much time thinking about this. I have to do it, you know?
That's really cool though, that you like actually, you know, took the leap and went for it. Cause too many people that I talk to on a daily basis, like talk about all the things they want to do forever. And so now here you are making it happen.
Yeah. Trying to.
So did you go to that class? Was that like during the pandemic or
it was
right
actually
before?
Right before. So it was like February 2020.
Wow.
I flew back through Seattle, and like that was where kind of it started. I mean, there was a lot of people coming through Seattle anyways. And so I'm going through the airport and everyone's wearing masks, and I'm like, what the hell is going on? You know, kind of freaking out a little bit.
Yeah.
And so I get home, you know, and then 2 weeks later, whatever is like the stay-at-home order. So, and that's kind of where things snowballed a bit. I was like, okay, I took this class, I came back, and, you know, unfortunately at Pine, like we had to really change things, you know, like we had to pretty much overnight, we lost most of our business.
Yeah.
And we had to basically let everyone go. It ended up being just Gare and I. And so I had a lot of time on my hands, and it was kind of like, well, I guess I can start working on this. And Gare was super generous, and we had like a back room that was kind of empty. And he's like, hey, you should just put your shop in here. I'll trade you. You build me a bike at some point, and you can just like start working in here.
Wow.
So that was 2020. And I started just buying, you know, tools and equipment and kind of what I needed to like get going, bare bones. And so, was 2020. And then I worked, you know, 2020 was a grind for us because it was just two of us really trying to just honestly keep that business alive. And I mean, Gare did a great job and really pivoted in a way that made sense. And so we, kept doing that. And then as soon as we were able to bring some people back and things felt a little bit more stable, I just had some more time. And so I was like, hey, I might go part-time. So I went part-time and was doing both. And then, it kind of hit a point where I was like, hey, I just need to try it. I got to just jump in and go all in and just see what happens. So that happened in, I guess, 2022. I kind of just like jumped all in and was doing it full time then.
There's something special that really happens too when you like get rid of that plan B and you're just like, cool, this is what we're doing. Like we're moving forward on this. And like, it kind of like lights a fire into your ass to be like, we're going to make this work now.
Yeah. Scary.
When did you like officially launch the brand?
So I guess it would have been 2020. I think I like, you know, made a website and Instagram and all that stuff during 2020. And that's when I was like, hey, I'm going to do this. And kind of how it started for me is I threw out an email to a bunch of buddies and was like, hey, if you buy the material and, you know, pay for the paint and all that stuff, like I'll build you a frame. And so I sent that to, maybe 8 guys or something. And that was kind of where it started. I had, you know, Gare was one of them. And then 4 or 5 other buddies were like, yeah, let's do it. So, that was like good, kind of get my legs under me and, hey, I'll build you a bike, kind of low cost. I was like, hey man, if that thing breaks, that's not on me, you know? And I'm like, it's my buddy. So I felt a little bit safer doing that.
Sure.
Did any of them break?
No.
Nice.
Like knock on wood, I've yet to have a bike come back cracked or anything. So I'll take that as a win.
That's
sure.
amazing.
Yeah.
I want to back up really quickly.
Yeah.
You said when you went to that class and started actually building the bikes, it was different the process was different than you expected.
Yeah.
In what ways was it different than you expected? And has the process adapted over time to become a little bit more comfortable in what you expect, or have you adapted to that process?
I think a bit of both. I think mostly it was the fact that I had kind of thought I had done so much research on the internet, watching YouTube or reading these old school forums and frame building or whatever it may be. And so I had this expectation in my head of like, I think I already know how to do this, you know? And it's one of those things where, you know, building a bike is way more daunting and there's way more nuance to it than like someone telling you how to do it on the internet. So I think when I say it was different, it was more like I thought I knew what it was about. And then when you really like sit there and you're like, I got to cut this tube and put it together, it's like there's so many things that can go wrong that this person on the internet didn't talk about, you know? So I'm like, okay, now I'm in a different situation, you know? And so that's more what I mean when I say it was different, and the fact that like I thought I knew something and I didn't know at all, you know? And which is great. I mean, it was a huge learning experience. And I mean, even today, it's like I've built, you know, 50 bikes. And at this point, I'm still trying to figure out, the best way to do something, or I'll meet another builder and they have some new way of doing something that changes the way you think about your process. So it's like allowing yourself to adapt and continue to learn. And but it always is seemingly different, you know? Cool. Yeah.
I think that's what's cool about the hand-built the hand-built like crew of people. Like everybody does stuff just a little bit differently.
Totally.
Like when you walk around any of the hand-built shows or anything like that, everybody's bikes are just a little bit different and their process is a little bit different. And so I kind of want to talk about that for you.
Yeah.
Like it seems like your background in design is such a pivotal piece in this venture. Can you like talk about your design philosophy and the influences behind the bicycles that you're building?
Yeah, for sure. I think for me, it's kind of similar to architecture, where you have an object that is supposed to function in a certain way. But on top of that, you want it to look, you have creative freedom for the way it looks. So like a bike, it's like at the end of the day, the purpose of a mountain bike or any bike is to ride a certain way for your body and for your riding style. But within that constraint, you can make it look kind of however you want it to look. And so I think that's where, and architecture is the same way. It's like, hey, I have this house or this building. It needs to do something, but we can make it look however we want to look. And so that kind of dichotomy between form and function is something that I really love. And that's what I've really gravitated towards, is like, okay, I get to build this beautiful piece of art and it has a purpose, like a very distinct purpose. And so I think that's where it all started for me. And I think that's all allowed me to kind of look at things different. Like, okay, I have to think about the geometry and I got to think about how it fits this person, and there's a million different numbers that make the bike ride the way you want it to ride. And then on top of that, let's figure out how to make it look cool. So I think I'm more of like a simple person. So I try to make it look simple and make it look clean. And that's kind of what I go for more than anything. And I think back to like a little bit of graphic design, like, you know, something that stands out, and I think a lot of people have gravitated towards with my stuff, is like the paint colors and kind of the overall image of the bike. People really gravitate towards. And so, just kind of creating a whole product, you know, it's like there's so much that goes into it. And just even down to the parts, it's like, okay, well, this part could be this color or it could be this color, you know, and how do those look and how does it all cohesively go together? And and I think I get like inspiration from kind of all over. I'm still kind of in the phase that I'm pretty new to it, that I can explore a little bit and try something different. And you'll see there's some of my older bikes that like I tried something different. I'm like, oh, that looks bad, you know, or whatever it may be, you know.
But that's that learning curve
totally,
that you need to go through.
And it's like, allow yourself to do that, you know, let yourself try something because you might think it looks cool. And if it doesn't, it doesn't, you know.
I think that's that piece. Like, so many people don't take that step and just say yes to commit to something because they think that they need to be perfect on the first attempt.
Totally.
But there's all of these like weird, I don't even want to call them failures, but they're like these weird byproducts of the process along the way that get you to this beautiful looking bike, or whatever that might be, you know. And I think you just need to accept that.
Yeah, totally.
And embrace it.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally. And it could be with bikes, it's wild because I mean, they're such a simple machine that, man, like the aesthetic does so much. And it's like the simplest change can completely change the way it looks. You know, if the top tube angle is 10 centimeters lower, like it looks totally different.
Totally.
And so it's like a very delicate process, you know, and I think that's where you got to allow yourself to try, because you're going to find that spot at some point, you know? But yeah.
And it also goes into like how you figure out what your signature thing is, right? Or like how you hone your craft. And like, if you're not trying, like you end up looking like other people.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's a really cool thing to like focus on, is I'm going to maybe take inspiration from these other people, and then you end up with a product that is so unique to what you're doing. Yeah. And the intention behind with what you're doing or what you're building with your bikes is so cool. And I kind of want to talk about like the branding aspect of it, because I feel like that's something to me that's always like grabbed me. Did you do the branding?
Yeah, I've kind of done everything, honestly, from the beginning. So because I've dabbled in graphic design forever, I was like, well, I also didn't, I'm starting on a shoestring budget. So I'm like, I got to do it. So yeah, I've done everything to this point. The website, every single photo of every bike I shot, you know, so which I do, I've loved that side of it, which is kind of something I didn't really think about, but building a brand, I've like really gravitated towards that and really enjoyed that process. And to have that control over your product and your brand is pretty amazing. So yeah, everything from the logo to the website to every bike, like it's all me.
That's so
much.
cool,
Yeah.
man. Yeah, I love that you also touch on the fact that like you get to, you know, influence every piece of it and you get to control every piece of it and create this thing that's like this cohesive, complete package and that you're aware of that because I feel like a lot of people starting a business is hard and a lot of people get into it and they start like stuff starts flying at them in different directions. And I know it's happening to you as well. And like, but you're able to like maintain and say like, this is what I'm going for. This is what I want to be. And this is how I'm going to create that, you know, manifest that vision into reality. And that's super cool.
Yeah. It's like, what's the story you want to tell, you know? And I think that's, yeah, I can sit and think about that for way too long, but it's like, yeah, I want to be, and especially when it's a business, it's really hard because it's like, well, who's my customer? Who's the people that are being willing to spend the money? And are those the people I want to tell this story to or through? And, you know, it's a real balance of like, do I stick to who I am and my core values, or do I go for the money or not? You know, it's a big, because I mean, with the bike world, there's so many different facets and so many different cultures. And especially with someone like me, where like, I want to build mountain bikes, but I also want to build gravel bikes. Like those are very different people.
Yep.
So it's like, how do you combine that story? And yeah, I mean, I don't think I've figured it out yet, but it's fun to think about. And I think, yeah, it's like, then you're creating a whole cohesive story that's true to you. And yeah, it's a challenge that's really fun.
Heck yeah. While we're on the topic of like chasing, you know, the core values versus the money, like have you figured out how to bridge that gap yet? Or are you kind of just like dabbling where you can and saying like, okay, I need to do this to make the money, but over here is the passion project?
I think I don't think I figured it out yet, to be honest. But yeah, I think I just try to, more than anything, I've just tried to stay true to what I want to do. You know, I think at the end of the day, I'm trying to create something and I want it to be something that I feel really proud of. And I think at the byproduct of that is people are going to be excited about it. And if you pour your passion into something that you really feel good about, I think other people see that. And so I think that's what I try to stick to is like, I'm going to do me and make things that I think are really cool and beautiful. And I hope that everyone else does too, you know, and just try to keep it simple. I think there are like nitty gritty details where at the end of the day, like the gravel scene, there's more money, you know? And I think especially with, like I've talked about this recently too, but between hardtails and gravel bikes, you know, $8,000 hardtail, that's a hard sell, you know, that's a hard sell.
Yeah. Cause that's a very specific type of person who's going to be excited about that bike.
Totally. And they're out there for sure. I've built plenty
I'm one of them.
Yeah, totally. And it's like, but most people at the end of the day, they want a carbon full squish mountain bike. Like that's what you're going to buy for that much money.
Yep.
Whereas in the gravel scene, you know, a high-end handmade bike is going to be, as far as a ride quality, extremely comparable, if not better, than what you're going to get from, you know, a carbon gravel bike. So there definitely is people that are willing to spend the money on that side of it. And I'm trying to learn to embrace it. I've never really been into the gravel thing. Like it's something I do when the trails aren't good, you know, but I've come to learn to love it more and yeah, lean into it a little bit for sure.
Heck yeah. Yeah, I hear that with the gravel stuff. It's something that's actually new to me as well. And I'm like trying to figure out how to love it. And like, especially when you do have good stuff to go ride. Yeah. And it's like this, and it's also like an interesting part or a place where the industry is right now too, where like the gravel scene is continuing to explode and everything else is kind of like quieting down. So I'm sure that's kind of a tough thing to bridge when you're like, okay, well, that's not my cup of tea, but people enjoy it. And I can also eat because I'm building those types of bikes, right?
Yeah, totally. I think go ahead.
I do think that the gravel scene, what's cool about it is it allows for a lot of like micro niches within it.
Yeah.
Because like there's like, you know, I have a carbon gravel bike that I use to go fast, but I'm also building up a steel gravel bike that I want to be more of a showpiece and like take me around town to get groceries, but also I can run 50 miles on it in a day, or I can use it as a big bike packing bike.
Yeah.
So there's like a lot of variety within this one little scene that is kind of fun to tap into. Different cultures within it too.
Totally. Yeah. I think that's what I've learned about cycling in general. Like there's so many different cultures and or subcultures that are very different from one another. And it's cool. It's like, which one of those is the people you want to find and tell your story? But yeah, at the same time, it's like, there might be someone who is a racer, but at the end of the day, they might want something that you offer too. So, and I think for me, it's like, I try to just be open and, hey, I'll build any bike, at the end of the day. But at the same time, I'm like, well, I do want to stick to like my value and kind of the people that I want to serve and try to serve them as best as I can. But yeah.
Are there frequent times that you get to be out riding one of your bikes and you see somebody else on one of your bikes around Fort Collins or something?
It happens. I wouldn't say a ton, but yeah, for sure it happens. Or like, I'll be at, say a coffee shop and there will be one on the rack or something.
That's super
which is
cool.
Really cool. And, or like I'll have friends be like, oh, I saw someone on your bike or, and that's always, it feels really good,
That's cool.
Yeah. I'd say most of the bikes in town in Fort Collins, like there's someone I know.
Right.
Yeah, but it's awesome. It's always fun to be able to like see those or see someone riding your bike, it's like very satisfying for sure.
I'm sure it is, man. That's I get that feeling when I see somebody like wearing one of our t-shirts. I'm like, that is the most bizarre thing in the world to me, especially when you don't know who somebody is. You're just like, okay, like that's really rad. So,
yeah.
So you talked a little bit too about how you like to ride like mountain bikes and dirt. Are your bikes geared towards that style of riding a little bit more then? And if so, like how do you go about designing those bikes in the early stages? What's that process look like?
Yeah, I'd say I always kind of pitch it as like my bikes are very dirt centric. That's kind of my bread and butter. And that's where I feel the most confident being able to take my experience and put it into a bike.
Mm-hmm.
I have built a couple road bikes and I was very upfront and be like, hey, I don't really ride road bikes. I'll gladly build you one. And it's luckily most road bikes, the geometry is pretty much has been the same for, ages, which is great. And the two people I've worked with, they knew exactly what they wanted and they're like, here's the numbers. And I'm like, perfect. That's great. But yeah, I'd say mostly what I build is meant for dirt. And yeah, I think I just try to take my experience and the bikes I've ridden and try to translate that into kind of what the customer wants. And a lot of times with handmade bikes, most of my customers, they have multiple bikes typically. It's pretty rare that someone comes to me and like, I'm new to biking. I want to spend this much money on a bike. So usually with that, my conversation is like, hey, well, what do you ride? How do you like to ride? What bikes can we like use from your quiver to see kind of where this one can fit in? So that's kind of how I form things. And then most of the detailed numbers kind of come from my experience of like, oh, I've ridden this. And I try to build bikes often enough for myself and try something different each time so that I can kind of test and see, oh, if I put a 150 fork on this, is it going to feel better or worse? Or if I make the chainstays longer, is this going to feel bad or what it might be? I try to do that as much as I can just to know and have some kind of database of like, okay, this is what I think is good, and
have you built one for yourself yet where you're just like, that is absolutely not good. Don't ever do that again.
Yeah. I have. There was one hardtail. It was like the second hardtail I built for myself. And I made it like, I kind of went with the trends of like super long and super slack. And I was like, I'm not into this, especially in a hardtail.
Yeah.
I think maybe in a full squish that makes more sense. But in a hardtail, it's like, this is not fun. It's like, serves a very specific purpose of going really fast down gnarly steep terrain.
Yeah.
And like, riding it on any kind of flow trail or any kind of XD trail just was not enjoyable.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I've definitely felt to myself taper back a little bit and not go crazy long in the front and not super slack. I think there's like a point where it just gets a little bit out of control. So.
Yeah. I see some of these hardtails that are like popping up. Every once in a while, somebody will drop a new one and the head tube literally is so slack. It just looks goofy. And I'm like, that doesn't even look fun to ride. Like the fun part about riding a hardtail, in my opinion, is how snappy and nimble that they can be.
Yeah.
And once you start getting rid of that, it's like you're not really riding it that fast down a hill.
Yeah.
Maybe, but like
no,
that's not happening that often, right?
We're not like living in Canada where that's all you ride or something.
Yeah, totally. Like we don't have stuff steep enough really to like make that fun. So
Yeah. And a lot of what we ride here is, like for me, it was like, I'll ride on the road to get out to the trail. And then it might be some dirt path or some XC trail. And then there might be one descent or something. Like for me, a hardtail is kind of an everyday, all day bike.
mm-hmm.
So I've tried to just taper it back and go into something that I know will be comfortable and fun all day.
Yeah.
I'm definitely more on the progressive side than XC, where it's like, I like to hit jumps. I like to, gym and do whatever on a trail and just have fun.
Yeah.
And so I think my bikes typically are catered more towards that. Obviously, if most of the time a customer has a specific need, like, oh, I'm going to race this bike. Great, let's do it that way,
Totally. Yeah, I think that is the beautiful thing about the hardtail, though, is that it can be that kind of like Swiss Army knife of bike where like you can do a little bit of everything on it, and it's really fun to ride them. So, are you doing like a lot of primarily custom stuff, or do you have production bikes that like somebody just can go on the site and like pick? Like what's the ratio of that?
Up to now, it's all been custom.
Okay.
But I have recently like designed a hardtail that I have like a full size run of, small through large, and then also a gravel bike. I mean, as of a couple weeks ago, I designed and have a page so you can just like buy that gravel bike. And I do have one other one called the Master of None, which is kind of a ATB do it all bike. I don't want to get too buzzwordy with it, but it feels like what is really popular and trendy a little bit of like, hey, I want to be able to jump on a bike, go get groceries, take it bike packing, ride some single track, ride some gravel, kind of do everything flat bar bike. And so I do have that bike as also like a stock offering as well.
It is so pretty though.
Thank you.
Like I would open up a different tab, go to your website and take a look at it, because it is in the paint scheme you have on the one on the website. Looks so good. It's beautiful.
Thank you. I really appreciate
really
it. Yeah. But yeah, that one I do. It's like, it's rigid fork. I build the forks for it too. It's like a segmented steel fork. And that one is, it can fit up to a 29 by 24, 2.2 with fenders.
Wow.
Or you could throw gravel tires on it and do that as well. But yeah, it's kind of meant to just be a all-arounder, and kind of, yeah. I mean, at Fort Collins, that's what everyone rides.
Yep.
People have these old 90s mountain bikes with a basket on it, and they ride the bike path, they ride single track, they go bike packing with it. And so it's kind of a homage to that a little bit of, hey, this is like a new, maybe better fitting version than an old 90s mountain bike.
That's actually super cool to hear kind of the backstory on like where that idea came from, because Fort Collins is such a unique cycling community in that way that everybody's kind of like mashing around town on these like cool, like old mountain bikes really that have been retrofitted to their needs. And like, that's something every time I'm up there, I'm like watching people ride by and I'm like, this is so cool, man. Like everybody has like their own flair to their bike, and you don't see that too many other places.
No, it is very unique. And I think for me, that bike did come about where it's like I had built 2 or 3 for local people, and that's what they wanted. It was like, oh, I want kind of a do-it-all bike. And I'm like, well, I should just make this a thing,
For sure.
So,
yeah. It'll be cool to see like how those start to do for you now that they're more of like a production style bike.
Yeah, we'll see.
Something that I'm curious about is, since it's all been custom work up until now, do you think once stuff starts turning more production focused, like it will be monotonous, or do you look forward to stuff being like, this is the large size hardtail and I know what I'm doing every single time?
I think a bit of both. Like I'll definitely always have the offering of doing full custom. And this is where it kind of gets into the weeds a little bit of like, hey, I also need to make money too, So like the beauty of those production bikes is that I can make them a lot faster, or I've designed them so that I can make sub assemblies. So I can do all the chain stays, or I can batch make chain stays so that like they're ready to go. So that's where it does feel better and easier. And also I really enjoy kind of that side of thinking about how to produce something, is how do I make this really efficient? What processes can I make to cut out all the fat and make sure this is super lean? And also I'm a one-man show, so I gotta like do it as quick as I can to make as much money as I can. But I think I'll always enjoy the custom side, because those are those challenges and those opportunities where you can get to do something a little bit different. And I think also with the hardtail and having production bikes, I've ridden them enough to know that, hey, this is something that will perform the way I want to perform. And I feel like if someone comes to me and says I want a hardtail, I'm basically going to make them that bike anyway, because that's like what I've come to learn is like the best.
For sure.
Obviously, unless they have a very different opinion.
Yeah.
But most of the time people come to me and they're like, well, what do you think? Like, you know, what's your opinion on this or that? And I'm like, well, this is the bike, you know, so let's just cut it and go right to here. You know?
I feel like that's the best way people can go about it, is like trust the builder, because like you really do know what's going to work at the end of the day. And like I've heard stories about people coming in and like arguing about like, you know, chainstay lengths with builders and stuff. And it's like, dude, you're going to end up with a bike that you don't like, and then you're not going to like my bikes for that reason. And yeah, that's a tough, like, you know, give and take with people. So
for sure. I definitely had that experience. I mean, being new to it too, it's hard to say no.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've definitely got myself in a few pickles where it's like, well, I don't know if I really want to build this bike, or like I'm going to bite off way more than I can chew in this situation. So learning from that a little bit. And I've been able to kind of curate that process a little bit to be like, okay, what you're after maybe isn't what I'm not going to be as good for you.
Yeah,
you know,
I'm
like maybe,
not the guy.
yeah, maybe there's someone else better for this opportunity for you.
Good for
know?
you.
It's hard to do for
Yeah.
sure, especially like, you know, when things are slow, you're like, well, I'll just take it on, you know?
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Well, you talked a little bit about, you know, obviously you're a one-man show. I want to talk more about like utilizing that 3D printer technology. Like, what does that look like? Where are you using it? Like, yeah, how much more efficient does it make building bikes?
Yeah. So the main place I use it is like a chainstay yoke. So basically the connection between the bottom bracket and the chainstays. So, and I designed it first off for mountain bikes. You know, when you get really short chainstays and big tires, your amount of space for your chainring and your crank and your tire, it's tiny. You know, you're talking millimeters. And so the beauty of 3D printing is I can design all that within tolerance on a computer screen. And I know that I'm going to have 5 millimeters around the tire, and I'm going to have proper clearance for whatever size chainring I might use. And then that way, when I put that on the bottom bracket shell, I know that there's no issue there. And so for me, that was just like peace of mind. I'd built a couple mountain bikes right out the gate and using like, you know, stock chainstays or whatever I could find. And that section being the biggest pain in the ass ever, and not knowing, because it's hard. You don't really know until you put a tire in it if it's going to work. You know, you can draw it out on paper and get close, but at the end of the day, once you put a tire in and cranks on, you might have a situation where you're like, oh shit, the chainring hits the chainstay or something. You know what I mean? Like, luckily I've avoided that for the most part, but you know, it was always like a stress point of like, I don't know, this on paper it works, but we'll see, you know.
I remember the first time. So I had a Reeb BMX bike built, and it was like the first one that they had ever done.
Yeah.
And I got to the point of putting the tire in, and exactly that happened. It did not fit.
Yeah.
And we were just like, oh man. Like,
yeah.
So I had to run a skinnier tire for the duration of that frame, and yeah, learn from that mistake. But yeah, I'm sure that the 3D printing like really is just like hands off.
Yeah. It takes out that margin for error more than anything.
Totally.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Are you getting those like in large production runs? Like, are you printing a bunch of them at once, or kind of as you need them?
Kind of mostly as I need them. I'll probably like 5 to 8 at a time.
Okay.
But the beauty of 3D printing compared to like traditional manufacturing, like CNC or whatever it might be, is that the price per unit is about the same no matter how many you do. So like in CNC, you know, you'll have a pretty heavy upfront cost to develop the tooling and the paths and all that kind of stuff. And then it'll get cheaper, obviously at quantity.
Mm-hmm.
But with 3D printing, you know, the cost for 1 and the cost for 10, the unit price doesn't really change that much, which is awesome because you can prototype, which is great. So it's like I can design one, put it on a bike, and then like, oh man, I might need to change it, and I'm not going to incur these huge costs again.
I love that.
So the 3D printing is really awesome. And then, yeah, so I only order a few at a time. And yeah, I've used it there. And then also I do kind of my like signature that I develop a little bit. And again, I didn't create this. It's been done before too, but I'll caveat that. But it's like a wishbone seat stay. I just love the look of it. You know, it's been a Bontrager thing, or there's these old vintage bikes. There's lots of other builders that do it as well. But I've used 3D printing in that piece as well. And that was a byproduct of like, hey, I don't really have the tools to bend this piece of metal. And then I was like, well, why don't I just print it? You know, or like I did for a while. There was another builder in Fort Collins who had this bender to be able to bend that, you know, specific piece. And I was doing that and it was working all right. But I was like, oh man, I wish the radius was a little bit bigger, a little bit tighter. And I was like, well, I could just print any radius I want,
That's so cool.
So, and then within that too, it's like you can do stuff with 3D printing that you just can't do with, CNC. So on my Wishbone piece, there's like a little logo that I polish with. It's all stainless. So there's like this little logo piece that comes up, and it's like, that would be so hard to do with CNC. And also they're all hollow. I mean, it's like a tube.
Yeah.
And it's like, you can't do that with traditional manufacturing. So that's the other beauty, is like you get this piece, it's lighter than anything you would get from a CNC because it can actually be hollow, and it's stainless steel, and they're pretty bomb proof, honestly.
That's so cool. The idea of 3D printed metal is like the most bizarre thing in the world to me. Is that something that you're getting done locally, or is it
it's overseas?
Somewhere? Okay.
Like there is some places in the US that do it. Just the cost was considerably more. And honestly, like manufacturing overseas, like those guys have had that technology for a lot longer. They've also have it way more dialed in a lot of cases. So I found a place over there, and it's crazy turnaround. It's like I can get stuff back in like a couple weeks, which is wild. It's really cool. It's basically, for anyone that wants to know, it's basically a powdered metal, if you will, and then there's a little device that creates a skim layer, and then there's a laser that just melts the metal layer by layer and like builds it over time. And it's really cool. If you like on YouTube, you can like Google it and find some cool videos, but it's basically just like a laser that melts metal layer by layer and builds this object.
Nuts, man. I love living in the future. It's pretty rad.
It's pretty cool.
I think that's like another really cool thing about what you're doing as well. And like, I've seen a couple other people out there in the hand-built world doing it, but I love the idea of merging like modern with traditional, and like putting those two things together and like making something that is a new form of timeless, and being able to, like you're saying, like make these chainstay yokes or whatever look so beautiful and cool, and like it's so seamless the way they can be integrated, and you're basically getting to create a bike that has never been made before. You know? Like that's so cool in a space that has been relatively the same for decades.
Yeah. And I think the one thing with 3D printing is like it can start to feel like a Lego bike a bit, where it's because of you have the ability to make it all and kind of make things quite a bit easier. The temptation just to kind of 3D print every piece of it and then like just kind of glue it together in theory, obviously it's more than that, but I've tried to just avoid that a little bit of like, hey, I want to try to stick to a little bit of traditional building. And honestly, also part of what I have done with those 3D printed parts is make it look like they're not even there. Like I would rather, I've designed them in a way so they look more like a traditional tube and not, I mean, there are some builders too, and like that it is their own design, but it's like they'll kind of celebrate the idea that it's 3D printed and make it stand out a little bit more. So it's very obvious. I've tried to take the other approach of like, hey, when it's painted, I don't want you to know that that's 3D printed.
That's super cool.
So it just looks a little bit more like integrated.
Yeah, goes back to the intention thing again.
Totally.
Like that's, to me, that's like the most special thing with any business is like it can look great, but at the end of the day, was there intention behind it? And if there is, like that gets me so much more jazzed. So like even hearing like, yeah, I'm trying to make it look more traditional. Like that's so rad, man.
Yeah, it's super fun. And like, yeah. And it's also, back to like just how simple and easy it makes things. Like even, the first version I did, then I had to put cable guides on it afterwards. And I was like, well, why wouldn't I just print the cable guides on there and just cut out another step,
Yep.
So I've like, done a bunch of iterations with that just to like make it a lot easier and just plug and play. And here we go, And so I'm doing that on mountain bikes and then started to on gravel bikes too. Just, it's not as necessary in my opinion with gravel bikes because the tires are smaller. There's a little bit more room to wiggle, but I just think like, well, now my process is kind of dialed towards that. And like my fixturing and tooling is designed around using it. So I might as well use it for all the bikes instead of like having two separate ways of building.
Yeah. And it also creates like a form of consistency too.
Totally.
Like it's like your signature piece. I think that's really cool. But I could see the temptation, like you're saying, of like, okay, now we're going to do a head tube and a seat tube cluster. Yeah. And I remember years ago, there was a BMX brand that they were using investment casting and they did the head tube, the seat tube cluster, the bottom bracket cluster, and the chainstay or what would it be? The dropouts.
Yeah.
And then, they just basically stitched it all together. And like, it was a really cool thing in theory, but yeah, it kind of takes away from the beauty of being a hand-built bike. So.
Yeah. I mean, unless that's like your thing, you know. There's been a couple people that I've seen that I think it's really cool, but they'll 3D print all those parts and then use carbon in between, which is kind of rad.
Interesting.
You know,
that also takes me back to early like BMX. Like I grew up racing BMX, so there was a brand that had that exactly what you're talking about. And they had glue the carbon in. I don't know how they're setting it, probably glue, but that's insane to me.
Yeah, it's kind of cool to see, and just like, you know, using different materials. And, you know, I think 3D printing also has allowed a lot of people to try stuff like that at a pretty low cost to entry. It's like, oh, I can sit at a computer for a few hours, design these parts, and like give it a go and see what it looks like. And so I think as much as I've tried to scale back a little bit from it, it's really amazing to see the innovation that's come from the low cost of 3D printing for bikes. And yeah, it's really cool. I mean, there's so many builders out there trying all kinds of wild stuff, and it's like, why not? You might as well just do it. You know, you have the chance.
I mean, that's why you're building stuff, right?
Exactly.
To tinker and have fun and do something different. With that being said, do you have any goals to ever do a full suspension bike? Maybe one for yourself or
I'll probably say myself first, just to see. You know, I've had friends do it, and it seems a little bit daunting to me, but yeah, no, I mean, I'll definitely try to build one for myself and see how it goes, and then see if it's something that can be streamlined and profitable for sure.
I'm excited to see that. I feel like that's kind of the future right now, that I keep seeing more and more people building steel full suspension bikes, and having ridden a couple of them, I'm like, yeah, I definitely enjoy the way they feel. It's a completely unique feeling on a bicycle, and I'm excited to see what you can conjure up in that realm.
We'll get there. I've been starting to work on it a little bit, just kind of tinkering here and there, but we'll get there.
Heck yeah.
The Reeb one is great. I rode their new one, like the mid-travel one, and that was the first steel full squish bike I rode, and this thing's great.
Yeah, having that like, you know, springy front end and everything, it's just, it's a completely different feeling. So, and I'm sure with your background and being able to design in CAD and everything, that will be an easier step than for somebody who's never played around in that world. Like just drawing it with pen and paper has got to be a headache.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely feel fortunate that I kind of, have the leg up a little bit and know how to use 3D modeling software for sure.
Heck yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about your production bikes a little bit more.
Yeah.
Do you have production bikes in stock, or is there a lead time if somebody was to order like the Master of None from you? Because I might order a Master of None myself because it looks so good. But
I don't have any in stock. The idea would be I would at some point, but currently no. I just, I'll build it to order.
Cool.
Yeah. And it typically, I mean, right now things are a little bit slower in the industry and just seasonality, but turnaround time is usually with paint. We're probably talking like 3 weeks or something.
Cool.
Wow. Or a month maybe,
I think that's another point that we wanted to get into is the paint on them, because that is a pretty unique feature from what I could tell.
Yeah.
Is that something that you can kind of get custom with any of those production bikes, or what does that process look like?
Yeah. So what I've chose to do is include 2 colors basically with every bike into the price, and then any additional colors or like complicated graphics, then that's just on the buyer. But my kind of thought behind it was like, hey, you're buying a very high-end product, and I just wanted the paint to match. It's like, if no shade on all these other builders, but there's a lot of builders that just do powder with like a vinyl sticker.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, I was like, I think I would be bummed if I spent this much money and I had that on my bike. So I kind of took that and was like, no, I want every bike to be really nicely painted and have wet graphics and just have it all be like very, very kind of high end. So yeah, but I include up to 2 colors. I also have been maybe I should charge for this, but I help design stuff. So if people have inspiration, I'll come up with a bunch of colors or paint schemes. And I feel like because of my background, that's a good value add to people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I've come to learn that color is the hardest thing for people to pick on a bike. So it's really fun to kind of take some ideas from people and kind of see what they want to do with color. I always tell people like cars are great inspiration if you're into that, or fashion or whatever it may be. And it's cool to kind of see where people take that and then kind of work with their colors or whatever and come up with some cool paint schemes for sure.
Has there been a paint scheme that kind of sticks out in your mind as like, oh, that was really cool?
Yeah, there was one that I was skeptical of for sure. And then it came back and I was like, dang, this thing is amazing. But it was like 3-color fade. So it went from kind of pink, purple, and blue, like kind of a sunset fade. And then we did like a speckle on top of it that was like a
Wow.
cream colored speckle. And then it was all matte. It wasn't like gloss.
Oh, cool.
And it looked, yeah. And then he had also had like kind of some matching components. So he had Paul levers that were blue and purple, and he had, what was it? Yeah, like the brakes, and then he had purple cranks, and
That's
it looked so
amazing.
sick. Yeah, it was really cool.
That's so sick. I love that that's your approach to it, though, is like being able to spec out a high-end bike in a high-end way. Like
Totally.
like if you're going to buy a Porsche or something, like you're able to spec the car out that way. So like, yeah, being able to do that on a bike is really special. And like for people who are spending that kind of money, like I don't really see that anywhere else where you're able to like really tweak things around and make it your own. Like that's pretty special. And the fact, like you're saying, like you're helping people and you're not really charging more for that right now. I think that's really cool at this stage in the business too, because at some point in time, I'm sure people are going to start coming in droves for that exact thing. And then
Yeah.
you can start, you know, saying, yeah, this is the production bike, but if you want that, or if you want me to go above and beyond with custom graphics, like it's going to cost you.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I just did the one that you were mentioning from Brave New Wheel for Mikey. Like we did like all Porsche colors. So like he's super into old Porsches, so am I. And so we just like spec'd out 4 different like vintage Porsche colors and like had them custom mixed to match the color. And you know, that bike just turned out so cool. So
I was losing my mind. Like I walked into Brave New Wheel, like, you know, sat down at the bar. If you've never been there, they've got like a really cool bar and a beer cooler, and you know, I'm chatting it up with them, and I like turn around and I'm like, how did I miss that thing? It's just like casually sitting there, and yeah, he's telling me about like the Porsche colors and just the whole like story behind it. And it's like, dude, that's so cool to be able to like, hey, here's my vision. And if, like you said, if you're into cars, then you can say like, hey, maybe I can't afford that car, but I can use my favorite, you know, paint spec and put that on my bicycle. And yeah, seeing that all come together, and like, yeah, I was losing it over that bike, man.
yeah, that one turned out really good. I always tell people like there's these car companies dump so much money into developing colors that I might as well just like jump on them and just take them, you know?
Absolutely.
And it's great. Like the Master of None you're talking about, that's like an old Land Rover, you know, vintage Land Rover color. I always tell people, I'm like, car colors are where it's at.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Toyota does a great job. You know, obviously any vintage like European car, the great color. Audi, their colors are amazing. So yeah.
That's really cool. Yeah, yeah, now I really want one. Are you painting them yourself?
No, actually down in Denver, a guy down in Denver, his name's Chris. His company is Flux Customs.
Okay.
And his whole business is painting bikes. That's all he does.
No way.
Yeah, which is really cool.
And what kind of paint are you using? It's not powder, right?
No, it's all automotive paint. So it's wet paint. Yeah.
Amazing, dude.
Yeah.
That's another thing you don't see often. Like, love powder coat, but like there is something so special about wet paint.
Yeah, it definitely does have a very different kind of visual effect for sure. It definitely feels a little bit more fancy.
Mm-hmm.
Which the one bummer, and we've been working on it just to try to figure out how to get it as durable as possible. Like with mountain bikes, I'm like, hey, we need to figure out a little bit more to try to prevent chipping or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
We've been doing also like some customers will do like a vinyl wrap, you know, in the areas where it's going to take a little bit of ding, and that actually helps so much. But you can just do so much more with wet paint, like the ability to do special effects, and there's kind of endless possibilities with what you can do.
You can create depth, and yeah,
it's wild.
And so are the graphics, like the logo and everything. That's all wet paint.
It's all painted on. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's like why I was like, man, I want these to feel really like high end, and having the whole bike completely painted, every logo, and yeah, it's great. And sometimes I'll have customers that they want some little motif or little graphic of their own. And like I had a guy, it was actually one of the road bikes I built, but he lived in Southern California, and he's like, hey, I want to do like, this is my favorite ride. It's up this like road that goes to an observatory. So I traced the line in like Google Earth in Illustrator, and then drew like a little observatory, and we put it on the down tube. And so it like shows the route that he like loves.
That's cool.
Little things like that are always fun when people come up with something to throw on there. So.
Super cool, like creative approach. And
totally.
Again, it's something that is so special and like so unique. That's the beauty of a hand-built bike as well. It's like it gets to fit you, and it's your bike. Like,
totally.
You can't just walk into like the Trek store and pick something up that's like that for you, you know?
Yeah. It's like you can get we can put your name on it if you want. You know?
Totally.
I mean, that's what he did. Because like, you know, in the road scene, that's kind of very popular. You have your flag and your name or whatever it may be. And so he had his nickname from his riding group like on it, and it's really cool. cool. Yeah.
Heck yeah, man. Well, I want to talk a little bit more about Fort Collins because
Yeah.
before we got on the episode, we talked about how cool that area is. And like, there's such a genuine grit to like what's going on there and so many rad people. In fact, it's a place that like I would love to live myself. What do you think makes it so unique and why does it have such a great bike culture in your opinion?
I don't know what like the root of it is, but I think Fort Collins has always felt like a little more down to earth.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think when you just get a gravitation of those people that kind of are a little bit more laid back and a little bit more chill and just kind of are just living life. And I think that's huge in the bike scene is there are a lot of unassuming people that, you know, are just very genuine and they do it for the love of doing it, not for the love of being seen doing it. And I think I always tell people, it feels very punk rock to me, where there is like this it feels a little bit more underground a bit and people kind of just doing their thing and kind of, I'm going to do this. If you want to come, great. If not, like fuck off kind of thing, you know, a bit.
No, that's beautifully said.
Yeah. And so, yeah, which I gravitate towards, you know, coming from skateboarding and that kind of world, like feeling a little bit more into subculture feels good. But at the same time, I think it's pretty inclusive and there's a lot of other people doing really awesome things and building a really cool community like Brave New Wheel. Like they have such a, you know, following and they do such a cool thing for the community. And it's a very local bike shop, which we don't have very many of anymore.
Yeah, it's a very special thing. Like every time I go up there, I'm amazed by it. I was just I was riding in Lyons today and I was talking to my buddy Dave who owns Redstone.
Yeah.
And I was just saying like, cause his shop is so unique like that too.
Yeah.
And I'm like, dude, it's so special that we have like that so close. Like there's a couple of these really amazing shops, but yeah, it's something that is like disappearing in this industry. And it's so heartbreaking because it's special to go in and like be homies with the guys that are working on your bike and like, yeah, guys that actually know what they're doing to work on your bike. And then you get to have a beer there and like, it's a community hub. Like it's so special, man.
Yeah, it's really great. And yeah, I wouldn't trade it for anything, but yeah, it's such a fun little town. And yeah, the riding is awesome. I mean, you can ride from your door, ride a little bit of pavement, jump on some single track, jump on some dirt roads. Like you can do 30, 40 miles or more and you're mostly on dirt, which is awesome.
That's amazing. I need to come up there and get a little tour from you because
let's do it.
I haven't really spent too much time on the trails up there. The closest thing I've really ridden is like Bobcat Ridge, but I hear so many great trails and like, yeah, talking to everybody up there, like you got to come ride.
Yeah.
So
it's fun. It's definitely a little bit more rocky and technical riding than, you know, a lot of stuff, but it's like you learn to love it.
Yeah.
There's times where I'm like, I got to go find a flow trail and hit some jumps. You know, I'm sick of getting my teeth shattered. But at the end of the day, it's like, you know, it's a pretty amazing spot. And to be able to ride, you know, even if I'm riding mountain bikes, to drive 5-10 minutes to the trailhead and it be somewhat empty and just go ride trails is, yeah, it's hard to complain for sure.
No doubt. You kind of touched on this a little bit too, but you know, Fort Collins is home to some of like the most iconic frame builders, and it's cool to see you like climbing up those ranks really quickly. What about Fort Collins like makes it a hotbed for that? Do you think it is that kind of punk rock attitude, or?
I think so. I definitely think, well, obviously there's a thriving bike scene, and then also too, I think a little bit of that punk rock feeling culture. You get those people that are kind of trying to do something different. You know, Bernsey from Oddity. I'll step back a little bit and tell a story about him, which is like one of my favorites. And it's a great segue into what I'm doing. But so I went and took that frame building class. Bernsey and I did not know each other at the time. We obviously had a lot of mutual friends. And I was working at Pine one day and he comes in the door and just goes to the guy that was working at the front desk. And he's like, hey, I heard someone here took a frame building class. I need to meet them.
No way.
Yeah. So it was like, you know, he has a very huge following and he's been kind of prolific in the scene for a long time. And to have him literally seek me out just because he knew I took a frame building class.
Wow.
And I mean, that just talks volumes to the guy he is. But yeah, it was like such a unique experience. And then we met and then it was like, hey, can I learn some more from you? And so kind of during some COVID times, like I would just go up to his shop once a week and like help him out doing whatever just to learn from him. Which again, going back even farther to our conversation, just the approach that people have, like he has a very different approach than a lot of people. And if you look at his bikes, he kind of has to, you know, his bikes are super curvy and kind of whimsical and like, you know, math doesn't really work when you do.
I know.
Like
I always look at those and I'm like, I cannot even imagine like how you would put that in a jig and be like, cool, yeah, this dimension is going to be like this length, and then it's bent like crazy.
Yeah.
It looks like a beach cruiser, but somehow rides like a modern mountain bike.
Yeah, like
It's insane.
One of the first times I was up there, I was very much so from architecture and then like engineering a little bit. So I'm like numbers at first, I'm like, okay, this tube needs to be this length and all this kind of stuff. And so I'm asking him like, well, how do you know what angle to miter this at? And he just literally holds the tube up and looks with his eye and then draws a Sharpie mark. And he's like, that's how you do it. And I'm like, mind blown kind of situation.
Crazy.
And so it's like, that's where back to you're saying it's like super technical, but
Yeah.
at the end of the day, sometimes it's not, and you kind of can make it work either way. But he taught me so much and also made me really think about it in a different way of like, hey, you can do this different and you don't need to have it be by the number. Like you can, obviously there's numbers that matter, but there's some numbers that you can make work. And like at the end of the day, it is a sculpture too. And he definitely takes that sculpture approach.
Yeah.
And obviously his bikes ride really well too, but they're all very unique and very different. And just his mentality of how to build something that way has really definitely helped me for sure. And it's like, let's not build a diamond bike. Let's do something a little different and think about it in a different way. And yeah, he's the best. So that story is so funny to me. That's like this person that I looked up to kind of getting into the scene and have him be the one that comes knocking on my door. I was like, whoa, this is crazy.
Yeah, that doesn't happen often, man.
No, not at all.
That is something that is so beautiful, I feel like, about the hand-built industry as well, is that it seems to be very collaborative and supportive. And I know that there's, like in the industry, there's a lot of, or there is some gatekeeping going on out there. Yeah. And that's a bummer. But to have somebody who is one of like the top dogs come down and just be like, hey man, like there are no secrets. This is how it's done. Like that's special. You don't see that happening around in other industries very often. And yeah, it takes a very special kind of person to, reach out a hand and be like, yeah, come into my shop. I'll show you all my secrets.
Yeah, for sure. It is definitely a blessing. And I think kind of back to Fort Collins in general, I mean, the community up there is that way. And there's been so many people that are so generous with their time and their knowledge and even tools, like at this point in time, like Bernsey and we might need a tool that the other person has and just jump up to the shop and share it. And there's a few other builders that are kind of the same way too. And it feels very inclusive and everyone is kind of out for each other. And at the end of the day, we might be competitors on paper, but we're not really.
Yeah.
And I've found that to be very true in the whole industry. I mean, I've learned very quickly that it's okay to just shoot a message to someone on Instagram, and 9 times out of 10, if not 10 out of 10, they're going to be super appreciative of like what you have to say about them and happy to share anything they know, and it's awesome. Like I think it's changed a little bit. I think the old school frame building culture was a little bit more into the gatekeeping and like, you need to earn your stripes, but I think the younger crowd and the kind of people who are currently in it are very like, hey man, what's good for the collective is good for everyone. So let's share our knowledge and continue to grow this craft and push the boundaries a bit. And yeah, so many people are so open, and I've been fortunate enough to kind of travel a bit and meet other builders from around the country, and I don't think I've met one person that I'm like don't like. Everyone is so friendly and so kind and just wants to share what they do. And I think at the end of the day, you might see these people and put them on a pedestal a bit, but then you meet them and you're like, you're just like me and just like everyone else trying to make their way and do their best.
That's a great perspective to have too, when you have people who are idols and then you get to experience or interact with them in like person to person kind of context. And just exactly that. You're like, you're just a normal person who likes something and is passionate about it. And you're not a superhuman. Like totally. You have feelings and you operate similar to me. That's really cool.
Yeah. The biggest bike, I went out to Oregon in August for this it's like a handmade bike show. It's called Made. And this
I've
year,
always wanted to go to Made, by the way.
It was cool. Yeah. So this year was the first year and kind of a big deal. I mean, there hasn't been like a true handmade show like since COVID that big. And so, had the opportunity to go, and all these kind of old school dudes that I've kind of been following for years were all there. And it was so fun to just be able to go around and just meet all these people and just tell them like how appreciative I was of what they've been doing and sharing. And it was like, the more you're in it, kind of anything, the smaller it gets. And to have everyone just be so supportive, and it feels like a family, which is really cool. Like literally, this is a kind of another funny story, but we were at that show and there's like one of our suppliers that sells dropouts and head tubes and all those pieces. They were there, and the lady who kind of runs like all their ordering and stuff, her name's Coco, and she was there. It's her birthday. and they bring out a cake, and then there's like 300 people that all know her. They're all singing happy
Whoa.
birthday to her in this like convention. And I'm like, this isn't normal. You know, this is a pretty unique and intimate like group of people. It was really cool. So it just made me feel like, oh, this is a little family and everyone's out to help each other out. It was cool.
Touching on the collaborative nature, I think is really cool. And like seeing how people are starting to band together and work together. It's actually something I talk about with other people in the coffee industry.
Yeah.
Is like, we are so much stronger together going at somebody, like in our case, like a Starbucks, or your guys' case, like a Specialized. Like, they won't notice if you guys sell more hand-built bikes. They're not going to notice if you take away 1,000 bikes from them.
Yeah.
But if you take a bike sale away from somebody down the street from you, they're going to notice. So the more we work together, the stronger we become, because people are looking more at what we're doing and we're not snobby anymore, right? Like the more, like in our case, specialty coffees working together, and we're not like, that guy down the street, yeah, he sucks. Don't talk to him. Don't buy his stuff. Like, we're harming ourselves, right?
Yeah.
So being able to be collaborative and work together and like be friendly, like it elevates everything we're doing so much more. And it's cool to hear that that's going on over there too, because yeah, it just sheds a far more positive light when everybody is friendly. And it's like, yeah, now I see why I should buy that bike. And yeah, there's intention behind it. Whereas if I buy something mass produced, yeah, that guy who owns that company is probably buying another house or a yacht, you know, like,
Yeah.
does he need that? No.
Yeah.
But everybody who's building bikes has families to feed and lights to keep on, and yeah, something cool to think about.
Yeah, for sure. It's something I don't know if I expected, but it's been so amazing. And yeah, and I think I'm at the point too where I'm starting to get those emails and those like DMs to be like, hey, how do you do this, or what's your process? And I think I've just tried to give back as much as I can, because I'm like, well, I mean, I built my business on being able to do this and reach out to people and with the wealth of knowledge of others. So like, I'm going to do what I can to give back to. So it's great.
Do you have a favorite builder out there right now? Like somebody that you would buy a bike from? Like,
Ooh,
who's
there's
killing
so
it in
many.
your eyes the hardest right now?
Probably like, and he's probably one of my favorite builders since I like learned about it, but his name's Kurt Inglis and his brand's called Retrotech. And he's in like Napa Valley area, and he builds these really beautiful, they're definitely like beach cruisery inspired bikes, but they're so beautiful. And he's probably been one of my favorites for a long time. But I mean, there's too many, you know. I would love to have an oddity at some point.
Yeah.
I keep being like, we should just trade.
Oh, that would be cool, man. Just
Yeah,
like make
cool.
the most wild thing for each other. That'd be
there we
sick.
go. Yeah. And then, I mean, there's so many good builders. I don't want to like make anyone feel left out.
Yeah. Yeah, that is the tough thing when it is like such a tight knit thing. It's like, yeah, everybody is killing it, and everybody is so unique. So
Totally.
yeah.
And that's what's like, it's, you know, if once you're in the scene a little bit, you do kind of see them as art, you know, a bit. And so there's part of me that just wants to be a collector and like just buy these bikes just to like have them, you know, but gotta have some money for that.
Yeah, it gets that's where it gets expensive.
Totally.
Man. But yeah, it would be cool to be somebody that, you know, had that kind of cash behind you where you could like have basically like a car collection.
Totally,
you know?
yeah.
But like, I'm sure there's plenty of people out there that have these hand built collections. But
Yeah, I've had a couple of customers. It's like, oh, I've had, you know, this person and this person and this person build me a bike, and this person. I'm like, dang, you know, which is cool. I feel like, oh, nice. I feel awesome being
yeah,
able
it's
to
cool
be a part
to be
of that.
like,
But
you know, added to the wall of fame there.
for sure,
man.
yeah. But it's cool to see there are those people out there that are connoisseurs, which is awesome, because they're the best people to build for, because they are so stoked about what you're doing. It's awesome.
Right
It's
on,
cool.
man.
Yeah.
Well, talking about like the collaborative nature of the industry, I'd also love to hear about, you know, people outside of the industries who have been like key supporters in this entrepreneurial journey for you.
Yeah. I mean, first and foremost, my wife, for sure, like the biggest supporter I could ask for. And I think just in all aspects, like she is so strong and helps me with, you know, any kind of questions or things that I'm really considering, and down to like when I'm in the dumps, she's like can pull me out. So I'd say like for sure her, you know, is definitely the number one. But I mean, there's been some, my dad, mostly just because he kind of taught me how to like be a maker and think about things critically and want to build stuff. And that was like a huge influence. Yeah, I mean, there's so many people to list, but I'd say those two kind of stand out in my mind. And then, yeah, I think just the community. It's like I get so much good feedback just every day when I meet people and they, oh, I've heard about you. And just to be able to get that and let that continue to fuel me is like huge inspiration.
Right.
You know, we were talking earlier, just like, oh, you know you don't really get to see behind the curtain too much, but then when you just randomly see people and they're so stoked on what you're doing, that just like lights so much fire underneath you and gets you going.
Especially when you're like, you talk about like, being able to use your wife as that person to like pull you up out of the dumps. But like we all find ourselves there no matter what you're doing or how successful you think people may be. And like, getting to like hear what people think about your process. So like when you talk about reaching out to the people you've deemed as idols and telling them like how cool they are, like if you're listening to this, like reach out to the people you think are cool, right? Like, because when people do that to you, like it lights you up, and like a lot of times you need that, and like it keeps you going. So
yeah, for sure. And I mean that's I think more too back to what you're saying with the inspirational people. It's like there's so many builders too that I've might have idolized, and now we're on a basis where we can chat on the phone or talk, and like those guys, just inspire me too. It's just like, man, you've been doing this for so long, building rad stuff, and the fact that I can sit here on the phone and talk to you and like bitch about it and also like learn a few things, like it feels so good.
Yeah, that's so rad, man. Yeah, that's something I think is unique about the world we live in now too, is that you can just like hit the people up that you look up to, and like chances are nobody is giving those people their flowers when they deserve it because you're too scared to do that, and yeah, that's something that I love that you touch on, and that I try and exercise that as much as I can too. I'm like, even if this person never sees this message, like I want them to know, like, I don't know if you saw, there's a new mountain bike video, Braden Bringhurst.
I haven't seen that one yet.
Dude, it's so insane. And like the whole video, he's like switching his feet, like right foot forward, left foot forward. He's doing opposite spins and like on the trail. Like it's just crazy. And so like I sent him that message, just like, man, I don't know how many people are going to notice this, but like I noticed like every clip you've switched your feet. Like that's so cool. And like he responded this long thing.
No
like,
way.
And it was like, wow, man, that's so cool that like, yeah, this guy that I'm looking up to responds like that. And he was stoked that I noticed the intentionality behind his work, right?
Totally.
And yeah, that goes a really long way for people who are creating or, business owners or whatever it is. So yeah, reach out to people.
I think it goes back to that point that when you meet your idols, you realize that they're just another normal person, and they probably don't get that many messages,
Totally.
Not about that. Not celebrating
exactly.
the process, because everybody wants to celebrate the success, but nobody wants to celebrate like the intentionality behind the process. And so, yeah, that's a good point. When you're kind of like on the other side of that curtain and you're like pulling the strings of your own operation, you're like, oh, like now I understand like what makes that thing so special.
Totally,
like I want to celebrate that for you, because when you are just on the consumption end of things, like you really don't get to understand, like, it's special, but you don't want to dig in any further to know why it's special.
Yeah. And I think one of the kind of a little bit deeper into that on one term is like with tools for frame building, for example, like it's an industry that there is a couple people now that are starting to make specific tools for it, but there's so many times where you kind of have to make your own way to do things. And so that's where a lot of times I'll, send a message, like someone will have a weird little clip of them like working with this little thing they made. And I'm like, that's brilliant. And like those are those moments where it's like, most people don't know what that does.
Yeah, it just goes over people's heads.
Exactly. But like I saw that and I was like, why have I not thought of that?
That's so
And those
cool.
are those times where it's like, I know that it's worth sending that message because like, that's so smart.
Yeah. When somebody recognizes that, like, as the person getting that message, you're like, oh man, like you care. Like that's special. Not a lot of people care like that.
Totally.
So
yeah.
That's super rad, man.
Well, and then also with the DMs, it's funny because especially with the bike world, it's such a small niche, it's like I might see these people as, kind of an idol or whatever it may be, but like, there's no one knows who these people are. The amount of times I talk to people and they don't even know that people make bikes by hand. It's like, what? That's a thing, So it's like, okay, I live in a very, very small world.
But that's also like such a humbling thing too, right?
Yeah.
Like I think about that a lot, where like I talk to people, even like, we get the same thing with coffee. Like people think we brew coffee. I'm like, no, we turn beans brown. Like that's what we do.
Yeah.
We don't like brew the coffee, but people don't understand, and like trying to like expect that out of people is so difficult. And I think it's kind of funny that you bring that up, because not a lot of people like dig any further into, like, again, when you're consuming, you're not looking at how a bicycle is made or how your coffee's getting in your cup. You're just, it is what it is.
Yeah. Niches.
Yeah. It's pretty unique, man. And it also allows you to check yourself on like where things are, and like, we're not saving lives here, man. So like the problems aren't that big of problems.
Totally.
Like that's something I've learned a lot over the last couple of years of like, man, I can be so upset about this stuff, but like nobody's going to die over it. Like at the end of the day, like it is this small niche, and like we didn't mess up that bad.
Yeah, totally. Have some grace for yourself.
Yeah,
For sure.
grace is amazing.
Yeah.
So now that we're talking about grace, I'd love to know, like, have you had any like things that you deem as like some massive failures throughout what you've done so far, or like big challenges that make you question what you're doing?
Yeah. I mean, I think just learning how to run a business in general can just be a very humbling experience. I think like learning how to manage money and make money, it's difficult, especially in a very little niche world that is a tiny little scene. It's hard, and I think bikes, and maybe I'm not sure about coffee, but like with anything that's small and handmade in America is very difficult. You're up against some giants that are, their margins are just so much bigger. And it's, so that part's been difficult for sure. And it's a continued journey. It's, we'll get there at some point, but I think that's been a big learning experience and a humbling one for sure. And then down to the building, like there's endless mistakes. There's been a couple times where I've had to scrap a bike and start over.
I was actually going to ask if that's ever happened.
Yeah. Probably the one that like killed me the most was I built this bike for a kid, and he wanted to do like internal routing, and we use like a normal, this gets a little nerdy, but like inch and a half bottom bracket. And I thought I had seen people do that before, got the bike painted and everything. And I'm like putting it together, and like everything, all the cables are running through the bottom bracket, and it was just too tight. I was like, if it was my bike, I was like, if it was mine, I wouldn't mind it, but I'm like giving this to another person, and I'm like, I can't do this. And I think those were those moments I'm like, okay, well, what standards do I want to live by? Like I could have just give it to him, like, this is your problem, figure it out.
Yeah.
But I was like, dude, I'm gonna start over, and it's like, it was painted and everything. And I was like, so I just like hung it on the wall and started over. And that was one of those moments, like, I will never make that mistake again. And it was a good one to learn. And I think it was a good test for myself to know that what are my values and how can I stick to my value. And so that was one of them. Like, I'm going to eat a lot of money here, but at the end of the day, he's going to be a really happy customer. And I hope that he tells this story to someone else, and that gives me a little bit more perceived value. So that was kind of the goal there, and it happened, and we moved on, But
I love that though, because most people don't want to own that shit, man.
Yeah.
That's especially when you have that much money and time wrapped up into something. It's a hard pill to swallow.
It definitely was. And I think it was one that I had to very quickly make the decision. So I didn't think about it too much. I was like, no, we're just doing it, and
Yep.
this is how it's going to be, and I think, I would do that again for anyone, just because like that's, again, you're also paying a lot of money for a product, and it should be a certain way, you know? So I think I just wanted that to be the case. So yeah, that happens for sure. And
I mean, that's the beauty of business though, right?
Totally.
It's like you are going to make mistakes, and those are never going to stop.
Yeah.
Like just because you figured that one out, right? Like what comes next? That's the way I'm always looking at it. Like I had a good friend tell me one time, like, if you think that like, the bad things are going to stop or the mistakes are going to stop, like you need to stop doing what you're doing, because they're never going to stop. They just keep coming. And that's, I mean, life in general, right?
Yeah,
like,
for sure.
There always are going to be problems, but it's how you respond to them, and having a list of like values that you can resonate or, base off of is very special.
Yeah. And then also just allowing yourself to learn from that. It's like, okay, well, I made that mistake. Let's figure out how to not make that mistake again, And I think that's, it's inevitable. And I think that was one thing that Pine for sure taught me too. It's like and that was also kind of back to what you're saying, is like the stakes were pretty low. We were printing t-shirts, but mistakes happened. And to be able to see how gear responded, and it was like, there was never a question of like, fighting over what was going on. It was always like, we'll make it right no matter what the cost is. And that's how we're going to do business. And so that was for sure a good learning experience. Like, okay, at the end of the day, these are t-shirts. If one of them is a little bit crooked or whatever, no one's going to really care, but that's not how we did it. It was like, okay, if it's wrong, and we'll make it right. So I think I've tried to carry that over and just do that. But yeah, I mean, mistakes happen for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you can't be successful without making mistakes. I've talked about it on the podcast a couple times, but that's something that has really dawned on me over the last couple of years, is like the people that I know that I deem as the most successful by definition are really the biggest failures, because they have learned what not to do over and over again. And they have been perceptive enough to not continue to make those mistakes. And when you kind of like flip the script like that and say like, okay, well, maybe I want to like mess up more then. Like the more mistakes you make, like the faster you make them, usually, like, and if you're being perceptive, that's the key here.
Totally.
And you're trying to right your wrongs, but yeah, then you become, by definition successful.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
um,
It's like just having that grace for yourself and just
Yeah.
allowing yourself, knowing that like that's a part of the creative and the learning process is to just fail. And yeah, just allow that to happen.
heck yeah. Well, now that we're on the topic of success,
Yeah.
what does success look like for you personally? Like both in terms of business and just like personal fulfillment.
I think on the business side, I just want to just continue to kind of grow it and allow myself to just let it kind of go where it wants to go. I think I'm still pretty new at it, that I just don't really know which direction it's heading. And so for me, just to see it continue to move forward is what I kind of currently see as success. And honestly, just to get more people on my bikes, and continue to see people riding them and, enjoying them. And that it's so satisfying to be able to like, hey, I built that, and there's someone riding it or whatever. So I think my goal is just to continue to, build as many bikes as I can and get people stoked about them, and I think building a story around it and continuing to evolve that story and let it turn into a brand that people can gravitate towards and get behind. And it's not just a product, there's like a bigger story. I think that's something I'm really trying to work towards and continue to grow. And on the nitty gritty details, like I'd love to like try to hire someone at some point and see how that goes and learn about that. I've never had an employee, like what is that experience like? So doing that and seeing how we can build more bikes and grow that thing for sure. And then I think like on a personal level, it's just, learning to just continue to allow myself to create and grow and, not being so hard on myself that I'm not where I think I should be. It's like just owning the process and allowing yourself to feel the process and explore what's out there. I think it's so easy to get stuck with what is the perceived success from everyone else around you, but it's like, well, what does that mean for you? And allow yourself the grace, like back to grace. It's like, life's hard.
Yeah. Life is hard.
Let's just take it a little bit easier and find what you enjoy and try to live each day where you can just enjoy something.
Beautifully said.
I like that you're kind of you talked about letting that brand kind of organically form around yourself and the products. Have you felt that brand shift at all since you started it in 2020 to where it is now? And how do you think that might change over the next 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, it definitely has changed. I think when I started out, I didn't really know kind of like what I wanted it to look like. I never built a brand. So I'm like, well, I just like, I'm going to make a logo that I think looks cool and I'm going to put some pictures on the internet and see what happens. And I think the more that's been out there, I'm like, okay, now I have like an idea of who is going to want to buy my bikes and the type of people they are. And like, I've also gotten deeper into the cycling industry and community. And there's definitely subcultures that I vibe with and some that I don't, and so I'm like, okay, well, what about that is the people that I enjoy, So yeah, it's definitely changed. And and I think the balance that I've been trying to find is whether it's based upon the money or like like what I'm into, because I think there's sometimes there's like, well, what I might be into might not be the pot of gold that is in this other subculture or whatever it might be. So it's that kind of balance. But I think continuing just to kind of see what happens more than anything. Like I actually was listening to, or I've been reading like Rick Rubin's book, and there's so good. It's the best. But there's one thing he talks about, just like the outcome. He's like, if you're looking towards the outcome, that's like irrelevant, basically. He's like, the whole idea is that you allow yourself the process of making the thing and just make the thing as best as you can. And the outcome is what it is.
Yeah.
Cool.
And so and I've tried to just like think about that in the sense of my business of like, okay, well, I could be searching for, okay, I want this specific customer and I want this to look a certain way because of this outcome. And it's like to let that go and just be like, well, I'm just going to push it in the way that it feels right to me and feels like that I'm proud of. And then hopefully the outcome is what it is, or it just will be what it is.
Yeah. I think that's such a beautiful approach to take too, because when you're like going for a specific outcome and then you put all this work in and you get to the end of it and then you're like, oh, only I thought that was cool.
Exactly.
Damn, you put all this work into like making something perfect. And if you're not just like going with the flow, a lot of times you get to the end of the road and you're like, why does nobody else like this? Like, it's so cool. I put so much work in. But if you are just like, hammer swing after hammer swing, and then you have the house built and then everybody comes around like, that's a cool house, man.
Yeah,
Nice work.
I
exactly.
also think if you just stay true to yourself,
Yeah.
people will find you. One of my mentors always tells me money finds talent. So if you just keep hammering away at what you like and what stokes your fire, then eventually like you're going to build this community around you rather than feeling like you need to fit in with another community.
Totally. And I think that's exactly what I'm like trying to do. Yeah. And
It just takes time.
it takes
And
time. Yeah,
that's
for
the
sure.
tricky
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. And it's like you definitely, I've like felt myself feel the pull of like, well, I should try to fit within the trend or fit within whatever it may be that like is more profitable in the moment. And it's like, well, then I'm going to hate this. And then I'm going to like be building bikes for people that I don't like or something. You know what I mean? And so you're totally right. It's like, just do it and let it be you, because your voice is going to be stronger than, you know, someone else's voice through you. So, yeah.
So many of these topics are like so abstract though, that it's hard. Like they make sense on paper or verbalized, but actually applying it to your everyday life and the practice of what you do is a totally different thing. You know, that it's hard, you know, none of this is easy.
Yeah.
Especially when you start applying money to the equation, right? And then you're just like, damn, dude,
And
like
time.
I could make more money if I did the trendy thing. Like that's really hard. But yeah, I think, you know, even what you said, like one of your definers of success is kind of building that brand and that story. And it's beautiful from somebody that sits where I do outside of, you know, what you're doing every day and seeing how far it's come and seeing what you've built. And like, again, I looked over at that bike at Brave New Wheel a couple weeks ago and I was just like, whoa, dude, like seeing like that be like seeing your vision materialize into what was sitting in front of me is really cool. And seeing that story start to materialize and like, yeah, not being the byproduct of something that's forced. I think you can feel that. And when you look at the bike like that, it hit me. Like I thought about it all the way home. Like I was geeking on it, man.
Well,
so
I appreciate it. For sure.
I used to design cycling kits, and it was always my dream to like be driving down the road and see somebody in a kit that I wore, and that's happened multiple times since then. And it always like, I don't do that anymore, but like it always is still such a special feeling. So I can only imagine like the hours that you put into each bike and the labor of love that it is, like seeing them out in the, I would go crazy just seeing them out in the wild. So
yeah, it feels really good. And it's fun to like, I always try if I can to, you know, go on a ride the first time they ride it or something
cool
with them, just to like, I mean,
That's
just to
cool.
feel that experience too. It's like, hey, let's, you know, sometimes I'll have to ship them every once in a while, but like if I can, I'm like, hey, let's go on a ride. We'll do a shakedown ride. And just to see someone jump on a bike, have it fit them perfectly and see how freaking stoked they are. It's like so satisfying.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And even for myself, when I built my first bike for myself to like jump on a bike, I'm like, I built this thing, you know, that was like the moment I was like, I got to keep doing this. You know, for sure.
This is real now.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Heck yeah, man. Well, yeah, this has been so sick. And as we kind of like start moving towards wrapping it up, like I have a few more questions, not as deep, I guess. Maybe a couple of them still are. I don't know. But, you know, I want to jump back to like Fort Collins as a city.
Yeah.
Since you kind of like live and breathe it at this point, you know, like you are a gear in the machine at this point. That's so cool that you're helping build this community. So if someone was coming there to spend like a weekend or a week, what are your top suggestions for people to do, places to go eat, somewhere to go grab a drink? Like, what do you like to do?
I mean, I'd say like just get outside first of all. You know, I mean, there's so much beauty, and it's like even myself, I forget how kind of epic some of the landscapes are. So getting up at a Horsetooth and just hiking around, or if you're on a bike, obviously that's better. But yeah, that's always a go-to in the summer. There's so much water up there. Swimming is always a blast. Food, Music City hot chicken, can't go wrong. It's like the
So
best.
good.
Yeah. For like grab and go, good kind of grubby food. I mean, there's endless beer options up there. There's so many good breweries. And
Do you have a go-to where you find yourself out?
actually, yeah, recently there's a new one called Hello Brewery.
It's beautifully designed,
It's
right?
really cool.
Yeah.
It's like it's an old house. They bought a house and then turned that into their tap room, and then they have like the brewery facility elsewhere. But great people, really good beer, like super chill vibe. Like, I mean, some of the breweries in Fort Collins have just gotten so big, and you know, those are like the ones that everyone goes to. And this one feels like a little bit more like local scene, if you will. And it's like, we have a buddy who's bartends there once a week, and so we just go there and hang out. It's like you're in a house.
That's
so it
rad.
feels
That's
super cool.
that's a spot I've been wanting to check out just because like I've had a handful of friends like post like their pint glasses or whatever, and I'm like, dude, this place is beautiful looking. Like,
Yeah, it's awesome. It's really cool. I mean, that's always a go-to for us too. And then, I mean, again, we got some great coffee scene too. There's some really cool coffee shops up there. Harbinger's a really good one.
Yep.
You know, there's good people doing good stuff for sure.
heck yeah,
Yeah,
man.
man.
Yeah, I love to go up there and just like cruise around the shops, the coffee shops, because like, yeah, it's so close to us, but it's so far away. Like in the fact that like there's so much rad stuff going on, and every time I go up there, I'm like, wow, there's like a new shop here. Or like even just seeing Harbinger opened up in where Pine used to be.
Yeah.
So cool, man.
Yeah, it's awesome. And I mean, the other kind of thing that everyone does up there is just ride bike path. It's like, I would have never done that in any other city, but up there, that's like a thing. It's like, oh, we're going on a bike ride. You would think like, let's go ride trails or whatever. It's like, no, we're just going to ride the bike path for 30 miles.
That's so sick.
And it's so, because you can.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
everyone has, it's like if you show up to a ride, it's like most people have their basket full of beer or whatever and just like ride around and hang out. It's so fun.
Oh, that sounds amazing. Dude.
I would love to get up and go for a ride with you sometime.
Let's do it.
And maybe we can like start the day with coffee shop tour, go hit some dirt, and then end at a brewery.
Yeah,
Let's
I
do it.
I
That'd be
love that.
awesome.
Yeah, and I want to come check out the shop.
Yeah,
Like,
dude.
I would
Anytime.
love to do that.
Yeah.
And
That's
with,
lunch.
yeah,
Yeah.
there you go.
Yeah. Perfect.
So with that being said, what's next for Bender?
Man, I think just continuing. Well, I would like to just get out of the bike industry lull right now. You know, I'm just kind of holding on, honestly. But yeah, I'm hoping that this kind of spring and summer things pick up, and yeah, like I said, just continue to just build bikes. I mean, I just haven't built that many, so I'm just want to continue to do that and get people on them and get people stoked, really. And yeah, just continue to try to tell the story and actually just find the story that I want to tell, and yeah, just hang out with good people and ride some bikes.
Right on, man. Yeah, I'm excited to see it continue to develop and again see what it looks like in another couple of years, because what you've done since 2020 is like mind blowing to me. And
Well, I appreciate it.
yeah, it's cool, man. Like, yeah, mind blowing. Really, I don't have any other words for it. Like seeing the bikes that are coming out every time you post one on Instagram, like, and the people who are riding your bikes are very special people too. So that says something.
Yeah, it's great. So people have been so supportive, and the customer base is great. And yeah, it continues to surprise me every time, which is awesome.
Hell yeah, man. Where can people go to find more on the bikes?
Yeah,
and
it's
the brand?
benderbicycles.com. And then Instagram is also Bender Bicycles. Just, yeah, keep
Super
it simple.
easy.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, website has all kinds of information. Also, don't hesitate to reach out like we talked about. You know, I'm happy to answer any questions or chat through anything.
Amazing.
Cool. I love it.
Yeah, heck
I might
yeah.
be doing that.
Let's do it,
Oh,
man. Yeah.
I like that, dude. Well, yeah. Any parting motivating words for the people listening who are looking to start their own bike brand or just kind of venture out on their own?
Yeah, I'd say kind of what we talked about a little before, but just don't be afraid to ask questions and also start. You know, I think those are the two hardest things to do, in my opinion, is to get yourself to do it and then also be humble enough to ask questions. And the moment I accepted that reality, things totally changed, and the growth just kind of went from there. So I think just like don't be scared to ask a question, and humble enough to know that you don't know everything, and then also like just take a step. 9 times out of 10, it's not that scary. It's just the first step is obviously the hardest. So just do it.
Hell yeah, dude.
Yeah.
Beautifully said. Like
That's right.
so many other things you said on
Well,
this
I appreciate
episode,
it.
dude. Thank you so much for coming
Yeah,
up.
thank you guys. This has
making this
been
happen.
so much fun. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
Love
excited to come up and ride bikes with you. Check out
let's
the
do it.
shop. That's
Dude,
going to be a
let's
lot
do
of
it.
fun.
Yeah. Happy to have you anytime.
Heck yeah, dude. Well, yeah, thank you guys so much for tapping into this episode. If you're enjoying these episodes on YouTube, please like and subscribe. And if you're listening to them on Spotify, Apple, or Amazon, please leave us a review. It helps get the word out and allows us to keep this project rolling. Thanks for being a part of the Traction family, and we'll catch you on the next one. Keep being scared of normal. We're out.